All right, today we're jumping into a really wild and critical moment in American history. We're talking about the shift from the country's first and failing government to the Constitution we know today. It's a heck of a story about how a nation on the very brink of collapse had to reinvent itself.
So just try to picture this for a second. Imagine the United States with no president, no Supreme Court. You've got 13 states acting like 13 little countries, each printing its own money. In the national government, it can't even collect taxes to pay for an army. It literally has to go around and ask the states for money. Sounds like total chaos, right? Well, for a little while there, this was the reality.
So, how in the world did America end up in such a mess? Well, it all goes back to its first attempt at a rulebook, the Articles of Confederation. You have to remember, they had just fought a whole revolution against a king they saw as a tyrant. So the last thing they wanted was to create another powerful central government. Their solution was to keep almost all the power with the individual states. And this analogy, it absolutely nails the problem. Think about it. A football team with 13 different captains all yelling out different plays at the same time, but no head coach to call the shots. That was the early United States. Each state had its own game plan, its own interests, and they were all pulling in different directions. The national government was designed to be weak, which meant it couldn't lead. It was basically a suggestion box, and the country was fumbling the ball, badly.
Okay, let's really break this down, because this is where you see the whole problem in black and white. On the one hand, the government could declare war. Great. But on the other hand, it could not levy taxes to actually pay for an army. It could coin money, but so could every single state, which made trade between, say, Virginia and New York an absolute nightmare. It could pass laws, but it had zero power to enforce them if a state just said, nah, we're not doing that. It was a government with all of the responsibility, but almost none of the real power.
So yeah, you can probably guess where this is headed, right? A government this weak, it was a ticking time bomb. The cracks started to show pretty quickly, and the entire American experiment was getting dangerously close to falling apart. Let's just dig into how serious these problems really were. No executive branch means no president, no leader. No judicial branch means no Supreme Court to settle fights between states. Then you have this rule where tiny Rhode Island gets the exact same vote as massive Virginia. You can imagine how well that went over. But the real kicker? To change anything in the Articles, you needed a unanimous vote from all 13 states. All of them. Getting 13 people to agree on pizza toppings is hard enough, let alone changing the entire system of government. It made progress pretty much impossible. And look, this wasn't just some theoretical problem debated by guys in wigs. The result was a country that was slipping into actual, real-world chaos. The very fabric of the new nation was starting to tear. You had states fighting over land, over rivers, almost coming to blows. The national government was flat broke. It couldn't defend the nation's borders, and it couldn't even build basic stuff like roads to connect the states. The entire system was just paralyzed. It was becoming crystal clear that America's first draft of a government was failing, and it was failing fast. Okay, so things are falling apart. Clearly, something had to give. The nation's leaders, the big names, they all knew that if they didn't do something, the country they just fought a war for would completely collapse. And that feeling led to a huge, high-stakes meeting that would end up changing everything. So, in 1787, they all gathered in Philadelphia. Washington, Madison, Hamilton, all the key players. Now get this. Their official job was just to make some tweaks to the Articles of Confederation. But once they got in that room, they pretty quickly realized that a few patches here and there weren't going to cut it. So they took this incredibly bold gamble. They decided to throw the whole thing out and start from scratch, designing a brand new blueprint for America. But creating a whole new government from the ground up? Phew, it was anything but easy. The room was full of huge disagreements, especially between the big states and the small states, and of course between the northern states and the southern states. To actually get a deal done, they had to make some really tough compromises. And in one case, a deeply painful one. The first massive argument was about representation. How do you make both the big states with lots of people and the small states feel like they have a fair say? Well, the solution they came up with was actually pretty brilliant. It's called the Great Compromise. They created a Congress with 2 houses. In the Senate, every state gets 2 votes, period. That made the small states happy. But in the other house, the House of Representatives, the number of votes you get is based on your population. That made the big states happy. It was a clever way to give everybody a piece of the pie. And here's the crazy part.
This whole thing almost fell apart. The delegates were completely deadlocked on the issue. Then, at the last minute, a guy from Georgia named Abraham Baldwin decided to change his vote. That one single act, by one guy, broke the stalemate and saved the Great Compromise. It's just an amazing reminder that sometimes the entire course of history can turn on a single choice made by one person in one room. Okay, now we have to talk about a really difficult and frankly a deeply troubling part of this story. Southern delegates absolutely insisted that the enslaved people they held as property be counted toward their state's population. Why? Because that would give them more seats and way more power in the House of Representatives. After a huge, intense debate, they landed on the 3/5 compromise. This agreement wrote into the nation's founding document the horrible, dehumanizing idea that an enslaved person counted as 3/5 of a free one. It was a dark bargain that held the Union together at the time, but it also baked the poison of slavery right into the system, guaranteeing a terrible conflict down the road. So, with these compromises hammered out, some brilliant and some truly painful, the framers had their new document. Let's take a look at exactly how this new Constitution was designed, point by point, to fix the total mess of the Articles of Confederation. This table really lays it all out nice and simple. For every single flaw in the Articles, the Constitution had an answer. The old government had no power to tax? Bam! The Constitution says Congress can levy taxes. No president? The Constitution created the presidency. No national court system? The Constitution created the Supreme Court. Couldn't manage trade between the states? Now, that was Congress's job. It was a complete and total overhaul, designed specifically to solve the problems they had just lived through. And that's the bottom line, really. By learning from the failures of their first attempt, the founders created a government that was stronger, more stable, and more flexible. A framework that, with quite a few amendments along the way, has managed to last for over 200 years. So you see how, from this total chaos, a new nation was hammered out through all this debate and compromise. But it really leaves us with a huge question to think about. The United States as we know it exists because of these deals. But when you look back, especially at something like the 3/5 compromise, you just have to ask, what is the true price of a compromised ideal?